Have you seen the DMT red laser light thing?
I've heard about that.
Yo.
I heard it's nuts. Have you done it? Have you seen
No,
it?
but I've seen a
No.
bunch of videos on it. Apparently, if you do DMT and you shoot a red laser, you see the Matrix, you see code.
Yeah.
And everybody sees the same shit.
Everybody.
Danny, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for
doing
having me.
this.
It's an honor.
Absolutely amazing to have you because I have so many questions. And first, I'm gonna start with this. You were living your life, you were doing things, and then all of a sudden you come up with this idea. I don't know how people come up with it, but you did, to conduct an experiment, putting people on DMT and projecting a laser. I mean, you'll explain a little better than I'm explaining, and then they see code, like
Right.
Matrix type of code.
Yes.
And then your life changes completely. And we'll talk about things and how everything developed. But just tell me what was happening in that time and how did this whole thing started?
So, yeah, one morning I woke up and I decided I should put people on DMT. That would be a good use of my time.
I'm sure you started with yourself, I would
Yeah.
think.
No, it was
No?
other people. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no. So really, the gist of the story is that as many, when you do DMT, it stands out in that it does not feel like what you would call a hallucination. Even people who are familiar with psychedelics, hallucinations are usually slight or long departures from what you already see, right? So if you have a surface with a particular, kind of texture on it or a color, psychedelics would play with that. So they would emphasize it. They would make it do something that it doesn't usually
Enhance the reality. of it.
enhance and maybe move it a little bit and maybe create some kind of a. When you do higher doses on things like mushrooms, for example, and this is where differences between the psychedelics actually matter, because acid doesn't do the same thing. People think it's similar, but it's not at all. With mushrooms, you can get to, what you would call more convincing hallucinations. Things that are truly not there, but you see them very clearly. DMT really stands out in that the level to which the visual scenarios are concrete is one that really starts begging the question whether or not it's really in your head or is it actually coming from somewhere else, because it's extremely coherent on its own right, and it does not seem to be a derivative of anything that you're familiar with. The building blocks from which it's made out of, they're not here. It's not like a departure from the texture or from the color.
Well, can you give me an example? Because when you say building blocks, I'm imagining there is space, there is some sort of objects.
Mhm.
So you're telling me that the objects are completely the ones that you've never seen before,
Yeah.
and everything just like how does it feel? Like what's
Not just, that's a great question. It's not just objects you've never seen before. It's the kinds of things that you didn't even know you can see. So it's
Give me an example.
it's hard because it sounds like a cop-out, but it
Mhm.
isn't. It really is the equivalent of asking me to explain purple to you if you've never seen it before. There is no degree, there is no way that I can't use anything from the color, let's say yellow, okay, even within just the colors, to explain to you what purple is. I can't.
That I understand.
Yeah.
Actually, I understand that completely. But maybe there are some characteristics
Yeah,
or
so-
something where you can
Of course.
point in the direction
But
of.
I just want to create that
no.
frame.
No,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
actually a very good clarification.
Yeah, it is. So the best way I can maybe approach it is there is a whole new set of kinds of experiences that the meaning of those seems to be aiming at a different direction of experience. So when you do certain things like, I don't know, smoke weed or something, right? You might get funny ideas or interesting ideas, something that you've never really thought before, but you can recognize it as a kind of a thought that you might have, right? It was like, oh my God, I never thought about connecting this and this. It's like, oh, it's brilliant, But with DMT, it really seems like it's coming from a different world. So Andrew Gallimore, who's a scientist who studies DMT, now he stepped away to do more of just writing, but he's a computational pharmacologist who studies psychedelics and DMT, or used to. And he wrote a few books. In his second book, Reality Switch Technologies, he makes a really good, he explains a really good model to look at the situation through, which is that the brain doesn't record information. I think this would actually give you a good understanding of how we should look at this. So the brain is not like a camera that is pointing at us right now. It's not recording information, okay? Your eyes pick up signals, and your ears and everything else. And then what your brain does, it basically consolidates it into world models. So, in fact, everything you're seeing right now that isn't out of the ordinary, most of it is being the signals are coming from the outside. Your brain completely ignores them.
So basically, you're telling me, like in Mel Gibson's like Apocalypto, the indigenous people did not see the ships. Because it's they're looking at the sea, but they're not seeing the conquistadors coming, because the ships is not something that they've ever seen in their life, so they're not even seeing it.
That's a really good frame to look at it through. It's almost that exactly. Only your brain is actually actively doing this all the time. So, for example, it's doing it to preserve energy. So basically, over time, the brain builds a world model, and it has a lot of, you can think of it as slides of like a guesswork, right?
Yep.
And it says, I think it's this. And that requires almost no energy because it already has that placard. So it just points it up. It's like, I think it's this. If the information from the outside matches it pretty closely, it goes, perfect, good. So now it doesn't have to do anything. It doesn't have to translate signals. It's just like, okay, that's good. And then it keeps doing that all the time. Only when there's something that is different than what the brain thought, there's a whole system that goes, whoa, it's not what we thought. And then it goes, oh, okay, what is it then? So it starts to guess between the other placards it has that are kind of adjacent to it. And it usually pretty fast corrects for it, right? So now, right now, the setting and everything we're doing, we already know what to kind of expect. You're going to talk, I'm going to talk, you're going to talk, we're going to talk, we're going to laugh, we're going to do this. And then it's all expected, right? So it's within this frame. But if all of a sudden, I don't know, a raven flies through the window, right? Now that's very surprising. Our brain will immediately go into that mode of error correction. It's like, whoa. But eventually we'll correct it pretty quickly because it knows what a raven is. It knows what, a bird is, all of that stuff. But imagine if a three-headed triangle with a, something that's just so... But it's not even... I'm just using these words as an illustration to illustrate something crazy. But it's not even a triangle. It's not even a circle. It's some kind of a shape that is literally made out of, let's say, 4 dimensions, which you're not... But in that space, you understand it. You go like, oh, I know what a 4th spatial dimension is, which there's no way I can explain it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you fully understand it. You can understand what is this, like, direction of in that is not into the 3-dimensional space. Therefore, it's like somehow into another 4th dimensional thing. So imagine shapes like this that make perfect sense to you. So what Andrew is outlining in the book is that purely from a neuroscientific perspective, not like, what people think, having extremely coherent content appear because of a perturbation to the regular machinery of the brain, it's highly unlikely because the brain is in the business of preserving energy. That would mean the brain would have to make up a whole new set of qualia and kinds of things and remap it into itself in real time, which never happens.
But then the question is, if the brain is understanding what it's saying and is able to compute, basically, then it has to have some sort of reference, as you were just saying with the plaques.
Not if you've never seen it before.
But how is because the thing is, it looks like it's the same brain, right? That's doing
what
this.
Does?
When the brain is on DMT versus not on DMT. So in normal life, the brain is doing its thing, conserving energy, looking at the objects, picking. If something is slightly out of the ordinary, it adjusts. When it's on DMT, supposedly what you're saying is a completely different reality that the brain was not exposed to before. And yet, correct me if I'm wrong,
Sure.
I'm understanding that when you are on DMT, and I've never been, so I can't relate, but I'm hoping you'll explain, is that it makes sense. So something for the brain has to make sense.
Yeah.
So if the brain has never done this before, how is it possible
You're
that
asking perfect questions. It makes sense because only to the degree that it has to. So it doesn't make sense. That's exactly the crazy part. That it's coherent but it doesn't make any sense. So it's almost like the brain is encountering something it's never seen before. It's trying its best to use the libraries it has to map onto it. It's like maybe this, maybe this, maybe this. I don't know, maybe this, maybe this, and it never lands on what it really is because the signals keep telling it nope, nope, guess again, guess again, guess again, and the brain goes where I don't have it in my library. So it's trying to build it in real time, basically. So it's that kind of an experience. That's the way it's very, it's a lot. That's why it's a lot for people, because I think it's because of that. If, the very famous, people always share that when they go through like something very violent, like a car accident, let's say, people always report time dilation, right?
Yep.
So that is most likely due to the fact that when that's like a big event, plus the danger is at red, so the brain goes, throw away all the placards. We're now going to a new mode in which we're literally taking the information in real time. And that makes it feel like the time is much longer because usually where you are in time is slightly removed. So the brain has the time to guess. But now the brain collapses that distance and now you're in real time. Now it feels like that's the time that the brain actually has to actually deal with reality. So if you go beyond that point, like it went through that period and now it goes into this new period where like, I have nothing. Now it has to go into some kind of a special mode where it's doing its best, like a ransom note to like put like the best thing it can do over whatever it is. But it's clear to you that it's not what it really is. It's like way beyond that. And I think that's what's happening in the space. And this is why it's so difficult to nail down. And that kind of brings us full circle to what I've discovered. Because of this fact about DMT, it's the only substance currently that serious scientists are investigating, not just under the question whether or not it has therapeutic value, which is what the majority of psychedelic research is happening in the world, like Johns Hopkins, and like, can it help addiction, can it help all of that stuff. It's the only substance that literally universities and research facilities spending money asking the question, hold on, is this real? So this already existed. I didn't know it existed. I just had a set of experiences that were so realistic that everything I just described to you, I was doing this for many, many, many years. So I was very experienced with DMT. And I was always fascinated by these, phenomenological realms because it's just beyond anything you can ever possibly imagine. It's incredibly joyous and amazing to discover new things. But then all of a sudden, I started having sets of experiences that were that actually started making sense. So like it was beyond the point. It's almost like my brain found a way to now map the real thing.
And how did it map it?
So the first being that appeared for me, or what I think the more rational thing, because they are higher dimensional, they found a frame to match my brain in a way that does make sense. Like they also found a way from their side. And the first thing that happened was I had, like a frog guy that just appeared in my room right next to me. And he was as real as you. It wasn't like this crazy, which I really want to emphasize this point because it's important. That never happens in psychedelics. You never have like somebody who's standing there that is like tangible. Even if you're seeing beings, it's usually a presence or a feeling, or it's right here in the periphery.
So just to be exact, so when you're saying tangible, you can touch,
it
and
felt
your
like
hand
if I
would
would
feel.
That's what it felt like.
But did you touch, or it felt like you can?
I didn't, but there was enough there. So it's almost like you're asking me now,
like if you touch me.
Exactly.
There's two things. If you touch me, and when you actually touch me, you know what I mean? You might feel that I'm here.
Yeah.
But when you touch me, then you say, okay, my hand is feeling, and therefore it
Correct.
is.
Correct.
So,
but there's enough information coming from the way you appear to me that I don't really need to touch to know that if I will touch, you will be there. Now, it's possible that maybe if I would, it wouldn't feel that way. But it didn't matter because the consolidation of information was so concrete as to be exactly how I'm looking at you now. It wasn't like a vagary. And that, well, first of all, I've never seen anything like this. And I had, already hundreds, if not over 1,000 experiences. So I knew what was possible. And that was not possible. So I was like,
you said you had hundreds, maybe 1,000 of different experiences, though, not the DMT, like different types of psychedelics?
No, different psychedelics, thousands, but just with DMT, probably, yeah.
But so you've done several. I mean, you've done a lot of DMT,
I was already doing it for like a decade at that point.
and only then you've
Yes.
experienced that.
Yeah.
Got it.
Only then. Now, I always usually people like whenever I do interviews and people ask me, so there's a linkage there that I think exists, but I wouldn't make too much of it. So like I want to put it right front and center before everybody jumps on this opportunity. But it happened right when I came back from a meditation retreat.
Meditation.
Yeah, and people always say, "Oh, so you?" I was like, I don't know if it was
Let's
related.
clarify. It was not some ayahuasca. It was just a meditation retreat.
Yeah, it was a meditation. It was just a Vipassana retreat. Maybe it had some connection to the fact that your mind is definitely clear when you know. But truly, I don't know. It chronologically happened that way, but I'm not sure it was related. But when I came back and I did that, he started basically. He was pointing at him and the whole room vignetted on this guitar in my room, and I thought, oh, they want to communicate to like music theory or something. I'm like, I'm not a musician. I'm just a Yahoo who practices. So then they're like, no, go to the guitar. I'm like, okay. So I go to the guitar, pick it up, and he disappeared from the side of the room he was at, and he appeared right next to me like that. And they put his guitar fingers on, his frog fingers on, where you strum or when you do the chords. And he's like, do this. And I try to follow, and I started doing it, and it was slow, but the chords made sense. Like they followed a logical, like I was like, oh. So he goes, do you understand? Like, you don't know how to do this. I'm giving you real information. I'm real. So I was like, and at that instance, I just knew that nothing will ever be the same again. That's what started me on the journey. And then I started going and literally doing this every day, all day. I was on DMT basically for a year and a half. I just smoked it all day. I go to the supermarket, I go to the gym. Doesn't matter what I did. I smoked DMT like all day, basically. And the whole time they were just appearing for me like straight up aliens, like different kinds, and they would like come and show me things and do things, but every time it would be somewhat esoteric. Like it wasn't like, here's how you build a spaceship. It was never like that. And at that point, because it's so convincingly real, but at the same time there's nothing forthcoming, after a year plus of this, I said, okay, can you show me something that I can like share with other people? And they kept on insisting, no, we're real. I go like, okay, but I know, but what do I do with that? How do I show other people?
But when you said esoteric, what kind of things?
If we jump into your body like this, and they would like match my speed, it would be like, hey, when we jump into your body like this, you feel it? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, okay, now go like this. So I would go like this, and the whole room would fold in half with me in it. And I go like, whoa. And they go like, see, you control it with your hand now. And I was like, but what do you do with that, right? Like, what if I just tell you this is like, I'm just standing there doing like this. So it's like, okay, I'm like, that's cool, but that doesn't tell me anything that I can share with other people, right? And then because of that, I said, okay, listen, I'm going to obviously come and visit because I love DMT, but I'm not going to keep doing it like this every day because it doesn't really go anywhere. But then I started thinking, like, okay, if it's real, there has to be something that we can say about it that is concrete. Like, there has to be some answers here, right? If it's real. So then the working assumptions were light is involved because I can see it with my eyes. If the space is real, it has a geometry. It has to have it because geometry doesn't matter how many dimensions, it just has geometry. And it means that it has topology, and that means it also has some boundary. So entry point for us, because sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't see it. Okay, good. So I started thinking about it because geometry does speak the language of mathematics. So if we can find some coherent things, we can maybe talk about it mathematically. So I started thinking about it like that. And it was very difficult. Now that you kind of know what the answer is, or at least part of the answer, it seems like, what? It's just so simple. Yeah, but you don't know what you don't know, right? So it's an infinite possibility space. So then I started thinking about some stuff from quantum physics, how quantum computers work. And the way the quantum computers work is that they literally distribute computation across, depending on your interpretation, either the many worlds or the wave function, depending on what physics perspective you want to take. But they do this. Like, this is real. We know it works. And it utilizes the coherence, which is essentially, this is obviously going to be a heuristic, but it's close enough. Basically what happens is that the photon for example, in the double slit experiment, okay, it is part of its own full function, of the full wave function, which means that it is the full dimensional expression of it, however many there are, is all connected. When it interacts with your sliver of the receiver, it basically decoheres from the rest of it and becomes just part of this slice of reality. Okay. Now, that instance of decoherence, you can transfer a bit through it, which is how quantum computers work. You can literally distribute the computation. So I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. I think if we do it this way, maybe there's something we can do with DMT that will allow us some kind of an observation. We can see between the realms. Now, I wasn't thinking simulation or anything. I was thinking like parallel worlds, things like this. And then we're not going to get into that because it's a lot of very small details that are actually kind of boring. But things started happening to me when I started thinking like that very clearly it felt like the world was literally communicating back. It's like, yes, look there. Okay, let's keep going. And I didn't really let it consume my life, but I was like, let's do this for fun. Like, we're just going to explore. So then I kept on doing that for years. And eventually, after I already met my now fiance and I told her what was going on, then things started happening to both of us at the same time, to the extent that she's a very skeptical person. But when that started happening, she couldn't believe it. She was like, that's crazy. I go, I'm telling you, it's like doing this thing. So she helped me. We started looking at these things together. And at the same time, I remember, I'll never forget this, we were sitting in a Thai restaurant in Colorado. And we were going through this crazy Googling session, each one of us on our own respective phones. And we both turned to each other at the same time and go, lasers? She goes, lasers. So we basically arrived at it at the same time. And then I didn't know what it meant, by the way. I just okay, 650 nanometer diffracted laser. I don't know what it's supposed to do. Ordered the laser. It was during COVID, so it was very difficult to get a laser. You can only get it from China, ironically. It arrived after 3 months because everything was backed up.
3 months is good.
Yeah, 3 months is
at
good.
that time.
Oh, you know all about it, huh?
Of course.
Yeah. And imagine during COVID, everything is like everything. All the ports are closed. And then I had to make a little circuit, blah blah blah. Turn it on, smoke DMT. I see code running in the wall behind the laser. So at that instance, I didn't expect it to work because nothing ever works. Like, it's always some kind of a dead end. It's like they give you all these things. Okay, let's play, whatever. But then when I saw it, I was like, and Kelsey was in the room, I said, there's a code in the wall. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, I don't know how else to say it. There's a code in the wall. She goes like, but I don't understand. I said, okay, well, I don't know how else to say it. So I started showing other people, and every single person saw the same thing. And not only they saw the same thing, it's not even the specifics of the code. It's the way that it appears. It has this kind of tangibility, not quite as a person, but it has this kind of tangibility as if it's some kind of a mega object that is literally in every point in space. And to a lot of people who ask the question, yes, you can project it on human skin, all the same thing. It's literally in every point in space.
And can you change the direction of the laser while you're doing it, or it
Oh,
has
yeah,
to be
yeah, yeah.
static?
No,
so
no,
you can keep sort of
it's like you're putting a
pointing,
flashlight in the dark on something.
and people see it everywhere.
Oh, it's like I'm revealing something in the dark. It's like you. It's crazy. It's like and it's always this. It's
And
there.
how many years in was that point for you? Like, how many years you've been doing DMT?
Oh, so maybe that was 4 or 5 more years, so maybe 15 years total.
15 years total.
Yeah.
Wow. But it doesn't mean anybody who did it for the first time, you would see the same thing, right?
With the laser or the...
Yeah, with the laser.
No, nobody sees anything else.
So basically, they do it one time.
Yeah.
And they'll see it.
Yeah, so with one caveat that we do encounter now a percentage of people that are having a hard time to see it right away.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know why that is. We're trying to figure it out. But it's a one-way street. So it just becomes more and more and more coherent all the time. And it's never anything else. We ran it in any which way. We told people something else on purpose, and they still saw that. People came back and said, I didn't see what you told me, but I did see these weird Chinese characters of some sort. It's always the same thing.
And that code, how does it appear? Is it matrix-like?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, it's weird. It's like it resembles katakana, Japanese katakana a lot. It's like a mixture of Hebrew, katakana. I'll show you after the show that we We have a VR artist that is working on he saw the code and is working on like a VR
Wow.
representation that we can kind of enter and like see it. It's very difficult because there's a lot of characters. They're moving very fast, and they're switching all the time. But coherent enough for you to understand that something is there, like you can see it. And now what we're trying to do is to see if there's anything that we can create, like a physical perturbation, to play with it. So far, it doesn't care. You can. This is an important point because the most common email I get is I see the code without the laser, or I see the code without the molecule.
And what's that?
So I've seen it. It's a different code. These codes are everywhere. So we now know that there's a lot of different layers of these codes. They're in light, they're in matter, they're in everything. People sometimes see, people that are more sensitive, more open, they see it when they wake up sometimes in the back of their eyelids. They see it on walls. I have, like, you have no idea. Like, I have so many people that this was a big surprise to me. They're experiencing all kinds of things like this. And they would say, like, hey, I'm a lawyer. I can never speak about this. I will lose my license. But I want you to know, like, you have to keep going. I've been seeing this for years. I wake up in the morning and I see this code. I know it's real, but I can't tell it to my wife because what am I going to say, right? So then what we do know, though, that these codes that you see without the laser and without DMT, they're a little different because they seem to be closer to what we are as a conscious being. So you can change them with your attention. And anybody, if you're listening to this and you think you're seeing the code, the way to test this is if you can tell the code to do something. Like, you can change the way it looks a little bit, or you can ask it to move to the right or to the left. It's real. It's real, but it's a different layer of the code. So it's closer to what you are as a conscious being. That's why you can influence it. The code in the laser does not care. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what you do, play a sound, tell it you love it. Makes no difference whatsoever. It seems to be coding for what we call physical.
So, just sort of
Sure,
uncovering what you
sure.
just said. First thing, so you said you can change it,
Not
but
the
it
one in
doesn't.
the laser, no.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
I understand the one that people are seeing just in their life somehow. But if they can change it, does
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily mean that it's not real. First of all, we actually
No, I
have
said
to
it's
talk
real.
about.
That's
Yeah.
what I said. It's real. It's just a different layer of the code. So we now know there are different codes that, and what I think is going on is that what consciousness is some formulation of informational processing within the larger code space. And what we call experience is clumps of this information processing thing that closes in on itself into a self-referential process. That creates the reference of the self. Now, you can have different levels of emergence of this. I think all of life would have that, which is what makes it life. But in an infinite informational space, it probably also exists in pretty much every single thing. So you can say that everything is conscious, but it's not conscious in the same way that we're conscious. It has this quality of consciousness, but if it's not self-referential, it's not going to have this like me experience of any kind, right? So what we think is happening is that what the physical world is essentially the third person representation of what the brain of God looks like.
When you say the third person representation, you mean our representation?
Good question for clarification. Yeah,
Pretty much the only representation we can
I mean it
reference.
mean it very simply. If I look at your brain under functional MRI, and just if I see your skull open for some reason, I see your brain physically, that's a third person representation of what you are inside as a first person representation. So you inside is a first person representation, but I can see what is the shape of the physical arrangement of matter that gives rise to the first person representation of what you are, right? So when you feel happiness, the third person representation would be the cracklings that I see on the screen when the functional MRI is reading your brain, but you experiencing love or whatever the emotion is. That's your first person representation. So the inside versus the outside representation of it. Everything
like
that
an
has
observer.
Yeah, so the observer experience would be the first person, and every single inner observation would have to have some instantiation in what we call physical, okay? And that larger physical space is basically the universal mind, which most likely its internal representation resembles nothing like ours. It's probably very different. Not just more complex, it's very different in nature probably, because it has all kinds of philosophical problems, like if there's nothing outside of it, it does not have anything to refer to outside. So it wouldn't have goals. It wouldn't have aspirations. Everything's contained. So it exists in a very different kind of state, right? But the reason I'm mentioning all this is because if you look through this frame, what seems to be happening is that the codes that people can change with their attention, yes, they're real, but they are representations that are closer to what your self-referential unit is. That's why you can interact with it with your attention. But there's certain representations that code for more far removed portions of the universal space where you can't just change it with your attention. You can change it by proxy. You can change it by the things you can influence physically, what we call. And they're ultimately the same process, but from your personal experience, they're too far away from your horizon to know that. Now, it's possible that, and maybe that's where we're going, if you evolve enough, maybe you can expand that horizon, and all of a sudden you would be able to change some physical things with your mind, which might explain how certain people
Can do
that
that.
we know can do certain things, right? And but it's nice because now you can formulate it into an actual theory that you can do something with, which, by the way, at least to me, it doesn't cheapen it. If anything, it opens beautiful new vistas of exploration that we can actually play with and probably create a much better kinds of experience.
But then it also begs an uncomfortable question. If everybody's seeing the code, is that the simulation that we live in?
It is. So it is an uncomfortable truth. I would admit that. But so there's a few ways to approach this question, right? And because I'm now in the habit of interacting with a lot of people, and I do feel some responsibility of framing it in a way that doesn't just jolt you out of your comfort zone. It's not the goal at all. But at the same time, we are creating a more refined, well-refined map of what in fact is going on.
And I just want to also say that you are working with a lot of very respectful scientists who are very interested in this. And, we'll talk a little more about that
Sure, yeah.
too. But I just want to put that there now because it's not, it's just not some fun talk over a cup of coffee. It's actually something that people are putting a lot of effort and science into it.
Yes, and it's more difficult than most people realize. Progress in science is very difficult exactly because you don't just let any idea fly, right? There's a lot of assumptions. People send me an email all the time, which again, I love the outreach, but there's as many theories as there are people in the world, right? And I always tell them, like, look, test it.
Well, that's what I
Yeah,
wanted
it's
to say. Your theory has a very uncomfortable problem. It keeps repeating.
Repeating in
Like the experiment keeps, you keep
yeah.
conducting the experiment and it keeps repeating the outcome.
So just to extend an olive branch to the fact that it is uncomfortable, I didn't think that it's going to be that uncomfortable. I'm pretty stoic in nature, and I can't claim ownership of that. I didn't have to do anything to be like that. Don't get me wrong. I can be pretty volatile and it can be very capricious, and sometimes I'm not like this. I'm not hovering on some clouds and walking around the house. Definitely not. But in terms of big things, I don't know why that is, but I just like, oh, okay, well, that's what it is now. Like a bomb can go off right now and be like, okay, well, it already blew up, so now what do we need to do, right? It's kind of like a natural thing for me. So because of that, I didn't really think that there's a difference between thinking we might be living in a simulation and knowing we might be living in a simulation. And at that point, it's not might be living, but knowing that we live in a simulation. So I actually didn't think that I'm going to care that much to know that for a fact. But I was surprised. This is the part where I have to kind of give a disclaimer. I do not expect anybody to accept what I'm saying right now just because I said it, obviously. But if I have to report honestly from my end, it's not the code that tells me we live in a simulation. They showed me directly. So like after a little while, I didn't think of a simulation, by the way. I was thinking parallel worlds. But then I started seeing things in the space. Like, for example, they would show me like, it's like this, like in a factory where they make computer chips, and there's this thing that does the soldering, right? So I saw this kind of a thing made out of light or something, and it was like doing some kind of a coding on the motherboard of some sort. And then I realized that what they're showing me is that the room is split in half, and that there's the right part of my vision, and then there's the left part where I'm seeing this thing. And I didn't realize it at first, but then I realized that, oh, it's tracking my decision making. So like I would look to the right and I would see things in certain colors. And first they showed me like how they can change a certain line of code here, and all of a sudden it changed colors. And they're like, see? They like would flip it and I'd go like, wait, what? And then I would notice that when I would move my eyes and make certain decisions inside my head, it would change pace. And then I tested it. I said, wait, because it was kind of a revelation. I didn't expect that. So when that kept on happening, there was a vase and a mirror in the apartment I was sitting in. So I purposefully kind of landed on this like right now, like I'm kind of looking at you, but not. I just stopped. I wasn't looking at either of them. And that thing just went, waiting. And I go, and then I looked, I think in the mirror, and it goes, it kept on like going. I was like,
So wait a second. So what happened first? Because if it's a simulation, then someone is controlling your actions.
no. The only thing that is simulated is the environment. That's it.
That makes more sense.
It's completely open-ended. Yeah, not your agency is not touched at all. The whole point of the simulation is to see what happens. There's infinite number of these simulations. We're just one of them. So, if you would control everything, there's no point to the simulation. Then it's just like a video. That's
Right.
not what it is. Simulation is you simulate conditions. You
Then
let it run.
Let the
You
free
let it run.
will do
If
its
you
thing.
introduce too much bias into the system, you're actually damaging your own simulation, because then you won't learn anything new because your biases are in the system. So we are a complete black box to them. They're not only they cannot by law, they cannot by function. There's no way for them to enter your mind and like cajole you to do
Right.
anything. You're
Right, right.
completely free agent. So by the way, all the ills of our world, all us. Nobody's intervening in that. Okay, so that's still the case. The only thing is simulated is the laws of physics. That's it. Now, there are what you could call a management company, and there's many of them, that they do the error correction, because there's always, in a computational system, that's just part of the game. There are always going to be some errors that happen, and somebody has to kind of help steer in case it gets a little bit too weird and crazy. So there is that, but they only cater to the physical environment. That's it. Which, by the way, this is just a fun thought. I don't know if this is true, but it would make sense to me in terms of they say vision boards and manifestation. I think, again, just a fun thought. I'm not saying it's how it is, but it does track with what I'm saying, because we think that it's almost like God knows what we're thinking. God knows what we're thinking a little bit better than what we know about each other that we're thinking, but not much better. So like I can kind of guess, right, the vicinity of what might be going through your head. And for the most part, of course, we're wrong, but I have some idea, because we read each other all the time. So God is obviously better at that, but not infinitely better, which means there are definitely portions of you that God can't guess because of the nature of the game. So that's why the fun thought is, what if they say you have to write it down? Because that's literally how God knows what you want. Or like a vision board is like, oh, okay, I see it. That's what you're trying to aim for.
So that's kind of a limiting type of God.
Well,
because if he's infinite, he, she, it's universe.
You're going to the deepest questions. Well, I'll tell you why it makes sense. Because if you are the infinite being, and you understand that there's nothing outside of you, and you understand there's no one else but you, we always talk about this, and you know that you can do anything, which means nothing matters, right? Nothing has value. We always say it in almost like a dreamy way. We're like, we're all one. There's no one here but you. But if you actually think what it means, this is horrible. This is like infinite prison. Like there's no one here. This is infinite loneliness. It's the most gutting feeling ever. So the only thing that would make sense, if that's the situation you're in, the two ways that would make sense for you to exist forever in this state is A, if you can, fracture yourself to infinite parts that don't really remember that you're alone, right? It creates the illusion of separation, but that separation actually what gives you meaning, right? But also, it gives you the opportunity to practice certain skills that just being in this infinite loneliness state is very difficult to practice. And those two things are A, try and understand why everything is there. So it seems that God knows everything aside from why it's there. God has no idea why everything exists. Okay, so that's kind of like the ultimate question.
Then who created it?
It does not know. So it seems that that question actually is not answered to anything in reality, which is why the simulations are running. The simulations are an attempt to answer that question. And the second thing that you might want to be practicing while you're at it is the more Eastern approach, which is, can you also let go of the question? Can you also just be? Because if you can do that, if you can achieve nirvana, not as an individual, but as the unitary system, well, now you're truly free. Because now, okay, I'm alone forever. It's fine. You just be, right? Full equanimity. But it does stand to reason that anything that is would have to have some possibility to evolve. Because if it doesn't, then by default, that thing is just the totality of everything. And then there's no occurrence because it contains all the negative of itself. It contains all the opposites of whatever it is.
But if we take it just for a second
Sure.
to quantum physics, which seems to me just intuitively a very good representation of what this everything can be about, because the two most mind-blowing sort of phenomena in quantum physics, one being the superpositioning and the second entanglement.
Yeah.
The superpositioning specifically talks exactly about what you're saying. Everything kind of exists in a possibility, and only the observer
Yeah.
kind of makes it into something, or
Sure.
for a lack of a better word,
Yeah.
or let it be one of those infinite possibilities.
Sure.
So if that's the case in quantum physics, and I think, there's no argument there, it is, isn't it the case in the larger kind of
Yeah. So the first
consciousness?
thing to point out, the quantum physics is a lower emergent phenomenon than what we're talking about here. So like quantum physics would be one of the possibilities in this larger space in which God would reside. Now,
what I'm
Yeah.
saying, absolutely. But
Yeah.
what I'm saying, if it kind of points to something,
but we don't know if it's the full universal picture. In fact, we have no reason to think so. Quantum physics is definitely the fundamentals of our world, for sure, with emphasis of our world. The larger world can be following rationales and laws that are way beyond our ability to ever conceive, right? But if we want to tie it to something tangible, I think that there are certain things that I think is what you're pointing to, and I agree with you, that follow from the lowest to the highest. There has to be some signature that is going through all of it, but I think that signature is just the instance of the observer. So that exists throughout all the levels. What seems to be outside of the scope of the observer to be able to ever see inside of reality, unless we're using some very sophisticated tricks, which I put forth is the reason for all the simulations. It's like reality is the answer to the question that God is asking, collecting itself basically. What it would be is in the famous words of the architect from the second Matrix, the problem is choice. Okay, so God does not understand how choice works, and the ultimate version of choice, so that fractal version of choice in the ultimate scale of things, is why reality chose to be versus not to be. That initial wiggle, because why would that is the question that bends the mind, right? That everybody kind of just jump off the train immediately, right? It's like, but why? Like, but why? Doesn't have to be. Why is it, right? And then even the answer of like, well, then it's what it is. So okay, but that didn't answer the question. So okay, so either you let go of the question, which is a legitimate way to go about
or you say it's random. It just chose
randomness
to be.
doesn't. Well, randomness doesn't. No, randomness actually doesn't solve it, because real randomness cannot possibly be a thing. Real randomness doesn't exist. It cannot be, right? Because randomness means lack of information within a limited frame. If you're talking about the totality of things, randomness cannot be a thing because it would be included in the totality of things, and then it's not random, right? It's Bernardo Kastrup famously. I think he probably. I think that's the best outline of free will that I think that ever can make sense, which is that only the universal agent can have that will that you're postulating, but it is only free to the degree so reality is free to choose that it is ought to choose. And that is really the conundrum, because your first works experience is saying, well, it was a free choice. But if you really look closely at what you just said, you're saying, what do you mean by free? Do you mean that it's decoupled from everything else that is happening here? You're saying that everything else is going on until this moment, and then we arrived here, and then everything stops, and something goes like a messenger runs outside of reality into something that is sitting on this comfortable couch and going, hey, should we do A, B, or C? And it's like, C. Okay, I'll tell them. And then you run back into reality. Okay, everybody, it's C. Okay, and we're moving on to C. Okay, where's this couch? Is it not part of reality? So it's infinite regress. It's like, where is that thing? So if you're talking about the totality of things, free will can't possibly exist. And you can't have, and this is really the conundrum, reality, with God included, it seems to be the impossible object that exists. Like, it's impossible, and yet it exists, right? And that is, so it's the snake that eats its own tail. It's like all of these things, right? And we always think on our level of emergence, well, somebody must have figured it out in reality, right? Aliens or God, but it seems that no, nobody knows, which is kind of funny, because, this thing that we think that we kind of one day, nobody knows. And that, to me, that's actually kind of beautiful. So we went pretty far. Let's go back for a second.
No, I wanted to kind of bring the point also, which is interesting, because we talk about free will, but you're absolutely right. If we just take the small, if we zoom in, right? We zoomed out. If we zoom in and look at a person, even though we do have free will, and it's kind of apparent, at the same time,
no, we feel like we do.
Exactly,
yeah.
but at the same time, it's exactly how you just described. You cannot run into a room that is completely devoid of anything and make a decision. You're making the decision based on everything that you know, that you believe, that you saw, etc., etc., etc. So what appears to be free choice is actually a combination of all those factors. It's
the result of everything that happened prior. Yeah. So the more accurate way to say it would be, a choice is being made, and then you have a story about why you think you made the choice, which is part of the decision-making of reality. But that instance, the instance itself of the left versus right, seems to be the hole in the donut. It seems to be outside of reality itself, which leads you to the ultimate exit, which is, why did reality choose to be versus not to be? That's really the ultimate question.
And when you say reality, you mean the actuality
everything that can possibly exists.
Well, but you mean on what, the universe, or
way beyond that? So the reality would contain all the possible universes, all the possible multiverses, all the possible megaverses, ultraverses, whatever you want to call them. Everything that exists and can possibly exist.
But is it possible that outside of that, there is something? Because if
then it would be part of reality, by definition. So what is meant by reality is everything that occurs and can occur. So if anything can be outside of that, it would be part of reality.
That's fine. But what if? We're obviously operating with our limiting human brain.
Yeah.
And, even the most sophisticated quantum computers, they're operating on a certain kind of like level. So is it possible to suggest that there is some better way of understanding things we just can't comprehend, and there's no way to find an explanation because our brain is just incapable of even going there?
Sure.
Like the example of seeing something that you've never seen, it just goes blank. You just don't see anything.
So I don't know if that's true, by the way, but it's a nice idea. Like this story with the ships. Yeah. Nobody knows if it actually happened, right?
That's true. But there are things where, as you were describing, the brain kind of goes crazy. Sometimes you might see something, and the brain is just trying. Like that process. I think a lot of people have experienced. Like even with possibly seeing a ghost or something, and then the brain goes, it's this, it's that, it's something else. It's just not the ghost, not the ghost.
Yeah. Well, that's it's trying to convince that it's not the thing you don't want it to be.
Right. Yeah. But even the brains of different people are different, and
Mm-hmm.
some people, are able to do certain things versus someone else. So what I'm saying is, if we step outside of the human brain, which we can't,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, so maybe there is an explanation there. We just can't possibly ever reach
Sure.
it.
Well, so one thing to point out is that I'm not this everything I just told you so far is not my guesswork. That's what was shown to me. Now, is it possible that it was shown to me for some other reasons, and in fact, it's not the case? Yeah, of course. But the way that I see my job in this whole thing is that I'm reporting honestly. That's it. So, and I hold it as a very high value. So, I'm only going to say exactly what happened, and I'm going to do my best not to add or subtract anything. Obviously, ultimately, it's very difficult to do, but I'm doing my best to the extent that I can. That thing that I told you with the after it showed me this, it kind of like signaled to me like, wait, what are you telling me? And they're kind of like, I'm like, I go, wait, and they're like, I'm like, wait, are you saying? And they're like, I'm like, and then kind of like testing the grounds with that. I'm like, well, why would you show me this? And then there was silence. And usually if I guess correctly, they would kind of tell me. They would be like, yes, no, yes, no. But when I would start asking directly, I was like, wait, does it mean we live in are you simulating this? They wouldn't answer. They would just kind of do something else. I was like, that's strange. But then after a year plus, I started talking about this, and when the console appeared for me, I don't know do you know what I'm talking about with the console? So about this, see, there's like so much information. I'm sorry,
I
I'm
know, I
uploading all
know.
the- yeah, yeah. So there's a few months after I built the laser and started talking about this, I was in the kitchen and I smoked some DMT, and Kelsey was standing to my left. An egg-shaped thing appeared in the middle of my room, and it was as real as this desk, opaque and everything, like space gray. And I was like, and she asked me like, "What's going on?" I said, "I need a second." And then things started opening up. I made a whole video about this. I worked with a 3D illustrator to kind of help me build what it actually looks like. So this thing opens up. It's like a oval capsule, maybe this big, and it opened like a flower. And then a podium came from the middle of it and opened into screens, pair of gloves, and a VR set on my carousel of VR sets that are rotating on my left. As real as this. Like augmented reality, like this, just like right in front of me. I was like, and then I could interact with the menus. Like I could like look at it a particular way. If I use my attention in a specific way, it would like dislodge the menu, would bring it to me. I could see code running in it. And this was happening. I call it the console. It's like and there's like pieces on the floor that open up with it, and it happens to me 100% of the time. Super cool. That's what we're going to be testing with EEG in San Francisco right now. So if I smoke DMT right now, that thing opens for me, and then it just comes to me, and it follows me everywhere. If I go outside, it follows me outside. It seems to be training my attention in different ways. So when that started happening, I go like, okay, hold on, what? So then I started asking them more like succinctly. I was like, okay, hold on, like, can you please explain to me what's going on? And then there was this one vision in which I smoked a bunch of DMT and nothing happened. And there was a sense in me that said, keep going. It's like, load up. You're going to need a lot of fuel for this one. I go like, okay. So I just keep smoking. And we were living in Pasadena back then. Our balcony was facing the mountains. Right in front of me, you know how the big satellite dishes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Satellite dishes, as real, came out from between the trees, between the mountains and the trees. And they had this code that we see in the laser in big letters like on it. Almost like simulation number 4785, we need this one. Like they're ordering a simulation right now. And it's like of epic proportions. Like the magnitude of it was just very hard to describe. So then everything I'm seeing in front of me, the buildings, the mountains, everything, was stripped to a grid. Like in Tron, like to a grid. And then it started, I see on the bottom of my street something that I can recognize, but I couldn't understand what it was. Then I understood what it was. You know, in a factory, you sometimes have like a block of something sitting on an arm, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically what I was seeing is that the other side of the street right in front of me, just upside down, sitting on this like enormous arm. So like if you would see something's reflection in a lake, just upside down, right? And then the whole arm just went in one piece, just it just like closed on the other side of the street, and I saw everything reforming from the mountains in zigzags, like started seeing cars and people appear out of nowhere, just like it kept on getting closer to me, and eventually just went and I'm standing there and they're like very quiet. So there's like, okay. And I have to admit that it did do something to me. Like I did feel this gutting feeling of like, it's like a gut punch. Like, wait, are we puppets? You know? And then later there was obviously a longer conversation, but it became clear to me that no, we're not puppets. It's what I told you. Like we're free agents, but yes, it is simulated on a substrate on somebody's computer, which is a little on the nose, but then again, it does make perfect sense. So even if you want to postulate it in terms of a spiritual thing, right? You would still have some technical way by which everything is constructed.
Absolutely.
And that technical way is computation. It's how it is. It's how God runs the simulations. And it has the quality that you experience as the spiritual journey of your soul. But it is...
Well,
but,
I think what freaks people out is the word simulation, because the word simulation kind of takes out the purpose out of out of existence, and they think that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
What you describing, there has to be some sort of creator of the simulation.
Ultimately, yes. Of all the simulations.
Of all the simulations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but the thing is that it's most likely not what we think it is. So it's
I
like...
think a lot of things on there.
Yeah,
what
exactly.
we think they are.
What was it? And what movie was it in? I'll give you as much money as you can imagine. And then the response was, I can imagine quite a lot. But so, okay, I agree with you that the word simulation has a particular connotation in our culture because of the way that we're using it currently. So a philosopher friend of mine offered to use the word simulacrum, but I don't know if I like it because it would match it more. Simulacrum just means simulation without a base. So you're not simulating anything, you're just creating an environment. And in the simulacrum, the substrate doesn't even matter, so it doesn't even have to be computational. It can be whatever you want. So I guess in that sense, simulacrum would work more, but less people are familiar with the word simulacrum,
True.
So it means less to them.
Because I think simulation kind of for a lot of people is like the Truman Show.
But it is. So here's the thing.
Stop it, man.
Yeah.
Stop
So it really comes down to whether there's a utility to using the closer word, even if that interferes with the flow in the moment of the way that people are experiencing reality. So you can say that there might be disruptions that are too much for the current state of affairs. We can say that, and I agree that there's a legitimate concern. However, if you actually look at the details, the word simulation, first of all, does not mean fake. It never meant fake. Simulation just means computationally rendered. That's it. Now, because we live in a world in which we believe that the base reality is our reality and it's the physical reality, and we invented a thing called computation, and now we're using this thing we invented called computation to run these things that we call simulations to discover certain things. And by default, what they are, they're renderings of other things that already are real, and we're making a copy of it to some degree and then trying to see what happens to that copy, right? So all of these steps gives us this idea that simulation means fake because we're kind of creating a less real version of it, right? But if you understand that the ultimate state of affairs is computational, so you put the matrix upside down, that the real world is the computational world, and our world is just a subset of that world, of a much larger computational space. What we call real is just a tiny sliver in the computational space. Now the word simulation just means parallel reality, right? Now, I would also agree that takes a lot of extrapolation and steps and explaining. But the reason that I think it matches is because it seems to me that it's not a coincidence that all of these things became available now, both my discovery and many other things that we know that are arising. Right?
Many, because you hear the simulation theory left, right, and center, and they always pay attention to things that kind of occur out of the collective unconsciousness. Because like for example, meditation. 30 years ago, it was a word used by very slim number of people in some
Yeah, yeah.
in some small parts of India, and now everybody in yoga pants are doing meditation. So it seems like things are just sort of popping into the collective conscious world, and you want to, I mean, at least I want to pay attention to anything like that, because there must be a reason why they're kind of like coming to the surface.
As my good friend Zoltan Bathory says, humanity has reached the end of its childhood. That's what it is. But there's something that comes along with the gifts of adulthood. It's also the birth of responsibility, and it's also the coming to terms with certain things.
I think that's very true. And actually, I think it's becoming more and more apparent how, and I don't want to offend anybody, but how childish the world still is.
Yeah. Very
So
much so. Yeah.
that is absolutely, and I think in a way what we're talking about, and that's actually, to be completely honest, that's why I mentioned the scientists, because again, a lot of times in the most childish way, people reject things just based on, I don't believe in this, but when you bring science in, all of a sudden people start to listen, which is an interesting, because to them somehow there is credibility in science.
And there is.
There is.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it's again, sometimes, you probably want to open your mind a little more and just allow the possibilities, because basically what's happening is, like, what we're talking about to some people might be like, those two are completely cuckoo. One is a little more cuckoo than the other. But the point that the scientists are interested in this is kind of brings that legitimacy, I think, that a lot of people are looking for. And I think people started recognizing you a lot more once it all became, quote unquote, so scientific.
Maybe, but it also maybe has something to do with the way that I'm presenting it, because I'm not really trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm just making something available, and I'm simply saying, here, you can do this, and this will happen. It is true, of course, that the second you have certain names attached and science attached, you do have a different kind of weight to it. But the problem you're outlining is almost like a Jenga tower. It's not like there's no linear progression here. It's kind of like all tangled within itself, and you pull the wrong thing at the wrong time, and it kind of all falls apart. And in this particular case, because you have both in what we call science and both in what we call spiritualism, you have, well, in spirituality, you have in both of them both gifts and problems. And because of that, it's kind of hard. People try to paint it as like this, black and white thing, science or spirituality. Well, they're really one and the same in the sense that they're both trying to understand the world. They're utilizing different modalities. So the way that I personally reconcile this is that I think that what science is, ultimately, capital S science, what it is an endeavor. It is the enterprise of human understanding. Well, it's the enterprise of understanding, period. But in our case, human understanding. And the problem in science, which is scientism, the belief that only the things that we can approach through these particular modalities that we currently have is the only way to understand the world. That is, of course, wrong on the surface of it. On the other hand, it is a very effective way to know real things about the four-dimensional space we occupy, and it helps us build a much more comfortable world. On the other hand, in which, by the way, means that to me, for example, introspection, meditation, ultimately, eventually, when science matures, it would understand that it is also science. It is the science of the inner space. The definition of science is observing something closely, saying what's true about it, and seeing if you can replicate the results, and see if you can understand what that means. Understanding is the ultimate goal, right? Well, that's what meditation is. You practice something, you repeat it, right? So science should absolutely recognize things like this as part of science. It's just that currently we believe that only the things that can put a device on and measure, it's the thing that is included in science. And it has to do with financial incentives. Again, nothing wrong with that. It's just how we do things currently. On the other hand, you have the beauty, obviously, the obvious beauty in spiritual pursuit, because it creates a more tolerable and beautiful and worth having moments of experience. On the other hand, it gives rise to a lot of nonsense because people just follow whatever, because narcissism is a ever-present thing and people just want it to be about themselves. And you kind of lose the plot very often. And you even start serving things that are quite demonic, to be quite honest. And it's very easy because it's like, the frog that is slowly being boiled. It's like you don't even notice you ended up on the other side of the spectrum where you wanted to be. So how do you reconcile this? Well, you open a conversation and you lead by example, and you do your best to have the charitable view of what is uncomfortable to the other side. I am very often being lumped with a lot of pretty famous, disruptors, like people in all kinds. I'm not going to mention names right now, but like you take your pick, right? There's a lot of people like that now. There's like alternative archaeology, alternative science, alternative this, and even though it is, to some degree, it's kind of like a nice thumbs up for me that I'm being lumped with people that are kind of did something notable in the world. I never understood and never will understand the attitude that almost all of them have towards the mainstream things, which is like, how dare they not accept me? I was like, who are you? Like, we worked on this for 200 years. People devoted their lives to build this comfortable world that you have. You walk in here and you say everybody are idiots. What do you think is going to happen, right? So to me, it's very clear that my job is not just to put the idea forth, but to present an understanding on my end of what I do know about what we already understand. If you did that work, scientists relax a lot more around you, because if you can recapitulate to them what you understand and it tracks, they go, oh, so you do understand. Yeah, okay, but here's what I'm adding. Okay, that's a different kind of conversation. And that needs to happen across the board. By the way, I'm emphasizing more the spiritual side always. It's almost like it sounds like because I'm more that, right? So I feel like it's more of my family, and I feel like I criticize it more. So the scientific shortcomings are more obvious. It's kind of like, yeah, they think that everybody else are idiots. Yeah, we know. Okay. But it's kind of the obvious thing, right? But it's a lot harder to see the shortcomings of spirituality. And I think it's important that if we are going to go towards this unified understanding, we have to leave behind these modalities of competition that are not actually competition. And it's really across the board. Like, if we really want to unlock the true secrets of reality, we have to come at it in full and from the most holistic perspective, and not demonize one another and to say, hey, this is nonsense. Science is all cold and doesn't care about the world. No, it's not. Most scientists are incredible, lovely people that just want to understand the world. So this idea that people have, like, I'm kind of flabbergasted by the amount of conspiracy things that are just now existing in these spaces. CERN is doing this and this. It's like people just lost the ability to see that the one thing that is truly democratic, knowledge, somehow they think it's, this thing that is trying to take hold of the world and bend it to its own needs.
I think it's mainly, maybe because they see it through fear. That's one thing. And second of all, I've noticed, people are looking for quick answers. Quick fixes to things, and more and more quicker, with social media and everything, like the way the world is going. And I think what people fail to understand is we're not going to compete with computers, meaning your brain just can't process that amount of information. And trying to do that is, to be quite honest, just stupid, because you're just going to destroy your biological machine by doing something that is not supposed to do. And I think what people miss in that is actually going deeper into things that they can and trying to understand things. Instead, they're just trying to put things in boxes quickly and be comfortable with the choices that they made of where those boxes go.
You nailed it.
That's why I think people love to make things, like label things, conspiracy theories, or this is nonsense, this is this or that's not scientific, that's too scientific, that's not spiritual, that's too spiritual. Because they're just afraid. And as you said before, I think they're afraid because we are, as a humanity, I feel, are still those little kids
Mm-hmm.
just trying to get into adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still scared of the darkness,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we just don't want to see it. Just
E-
don't show it to us.
Exactly. But also to point out that, especially in the example that you gave, we are our brain does things computationally, but we are not computers. You're not competing with computers because you're not the same kind of thing. Before we started rolling, we were talking a little bit about ChatGPT, and I think it really reveals that very clearly, that people are afraid, oh, it's going to take our jobs. Like, well, if your job is to answer a lot of emails, yes, but do you want to answer a lot of emails? Is that what you want to do? It's
I
not.
think you nailed it.
Yeah, it shows you, it shows the delusion that people have about where agency comes from and what it actually is. People believe, for example, that if you just give them $8 billion right now and a lot of power, somehow that's it. I'm good. No, you're not. If you don't know how to make the right kind of decisions, you're going to make a mess. You're just going to make a way bigger mess. That's all. So it's like, by the way, anybody can test this, okay? So you go, right now, you can literally go and ask ChatGPT anything, right? Literally anything. I want everybody to notice in this first instance, if you don't already have a goal, like, hey, can you make this article better or whatever, which is already something that you brought in as a limitation of yours of what you think you should do now. But if I give you the task, hey, go explore whatever you want on ChatGPT. Go with nothing else but that intention. I want everybody to notice very clearly that for a good 10 or 15 seconds, you're going to hit blank. You're not going to know the first thing about what you want. Isn't that
a
interesting?
Great test. Yep.
Isn't that interesting? So now, but the fact is that you can do anything. So the limits of the imagination, they're actually the final frontier because they are the true unlocking of whatever it is. Every single day, I see people using ChatGPT in ways that I would never consider. I'm like, oh my God, this is brilliant. How did I not think of that? It's like, yeah, because it's literally infinite in scope. So it's really just your imagination. So now think what that means. That means that really all the stuff that we currently think are the things we're for were just little things that we needed to do until a certain point, until we realize what we really are, which is the actual creators of new ideas, new knowledge, This is where the agent comes in. These things are just extensions of us. We're not wearing them yet. They're not integrated yet. But the second ChatGPT gets in your brain, either through a wearable or through like a direct execution, now you're cooking. Now you will understand that all of a sudden your interaction with meaning is like on a completely different level. The dopamine hit you get from writing a good piece that people enjoy is nothing in comparison. It doesn't matter that you can now have ChatGPT write 8 articles like that, because what was really behind it was the meaning the thing you were getting at. So now you can get at it faster, right? And there's nothing wrong with that because it opens a whole new domain of understanding and of ways of doing things, of interacting with one another.
But do you think people are ready?
They don't have a choice.
No, meaning, we spoke sort of briefly about responsibility.
Yeah.
So when you have, let's say, scary to most people, if you have ChatGPT in your head, physically,
Yeah.
it's like in a way a kid with I don't know, Kalashnikov, meaning like
No, because you
but
still need to.
do you know like what are you gonna do with it? And are you responsible enough to not do stupid shit with it?
It only gets to dangerous levels when you can directly influence others' worlds and states.
I don't mean dangerous in terms of necessarily violence towards
Okay.
others, but just just destroying you basically.
Well,
like
give
it's
me.
some
Can
sort
you
of-
can you think of an example? I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
but
yeah, no, but like I'll give you an example with social media. Social media is destroying people's life. It's a fact because people
So
are completely.
I will challenge you on that, but sure.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah.
Because what's happening is how I see it, but it's too fast. It's completely devoid of any real interaction. Meaning, let me rephrase it. It can have meaning and it can have real interaction.
Sure.
The problem is that most people are not using it in that way. They're using it to enhance their image, to enhance how they look to the outside of the world and count the likes, which do not exist,
You're
because
saying too fast, too soon.
someone's handshake and a nod of approval means way more physically even to a human being
Yeah.
than 5,000 likes.
Sure.
That's what I'm talking about. So in
Too
that
fast,
sense,
too soon. Yeah.
not only too fast, too soon, but too empty, too huge.
Interesting. Okay. Valid point. It always exists within the infinite possibility space into which it's unfolding. It's difficult to see because currently the only thing we think about as real is what we call physical. So everything that isn't somehow attached to this thing we call physical, we consider it as to be not as real or vacuous, and it's not worth pursuing, right? But the truth is that it's nowhere written that brains have to exist in the substrate of what we call physical, right? The only thing that puts a certain weight on physical interaction that doesn't exist in the virtual space is physical ramifications.
I just saw a very scary image. Remember from The Matrix when he's still laying in that pool of some strange liquid, still connected to his brain is connected? You pretty much described that when you said, well, the brain doesn't necessarily need to be attached to anything physical.
No, even it can be like in a purely informational space. It's a still open question whether you need it to be like it's still instantiated in something physical in the movie.
Correct, but it's not relying on that or not having any direct communication with the physical body.
No, in the movie, it definitely does. You remember there was even a line in the movie where he's asking him, like, wait, but this was a simulation. Why am I bleeding? He said, well, the brain cannot survive without the body. So that was a very big hint as to what it was actually.
For sure, but the body is sitting in that incubator. Remember the incubator?
Yeah, but it means that there's a body, is my point.
Right.
So I'm saying that it might not need that.
Oh.
Yeah, so you might not need the body. So, but that's already looking a little too far, I think, in terms of what most people can connect it to that will be valuable to them. I think that ultimately, this is where the movie The Matrix definitely gets it wrong, right? Philosophically, the movie doesn't make any sense, but it's one of the greatest films of all time, so we'll let it pass. But philosophically, the movie doesn't make any sense because ultimately, it doesn't really matter how your experience arises. It makes no difference. The attempt to get to the real world, it's nonsensical because the machines actually did the most ethical thing they could because that's what they needed to survive. So they didn't just not care about our brains. They could have easily do that. They created a world for us in which it makes sense to exist, and that it has the exact same as long as you experience it as an agent, as a pain, as a love, as a whatever. That's reality. It doesn't matter how it comes about. It makes no difference. If you stub your toe in the middle of the night, if I tell you it's all a simulation, you're going to slap me in the face. You don't care. I was like, no, that's real. Okay, yeah, it is. It's what you're experiencing right now. And even if you want to say it's all going to be mended at the end of time, okay, but right now I'm experiencing it, So then that and it's actually funny. I don't know if you saw it. Keanu Reeves was recently talking in an interview, and he said, I met this teenage girl, and she'd never seen The Matrix, so he told her like what the premise was, and he's like, and we were like, in a computer simulation, and then we're trying to get out of it, and she goes like, why? and he said, wow, what a smart kid. it's like, what's the difference? So now
to be fair, they had a character in the movie who said that.
Sure, but he was the bad guy. But he was painted as the bad guy, is my point. So Cypher got it right? So then the funny thing is that it really points to we have a delusion about what matters, right? Maybe pun intended, maybe not, I'm not sure. But people, and I'm sure you're familiar with people that like believe that we're going to ascend to the fifth dimension soon, right? Okay. What I always point out is like, okay, hold on. If you tend to get cranky about things right now, do you think that's going to stop in 5 dimensions? You're going to be cranky about 5-dimensional things. That's all. Like it's at no point you're excused from the work you have to be doing from your personal side. It does never goes away. But then I'm connecting it to the ChatGPT thing, which is that the reason I asked you for a specific example is because if I would challenge you, and maybe you can come up with an example, but I can't see anything that if you actually look at the details of how that executes. 10 years ago, if I would tell you something like ChatGPT exists, you would be telling me the same thing about it. It was like, yeah, but everybody can just type it into it, whatever they want. Because here's the truth about ChatGPT.
I have an example.
Please, but before you
Yes.
give it to me, here's the truth about ChatGPT right now as it stands. You can write any code. You can ask it to debug the code. You can ask it for a code to try and break into the Pentagon and get all the information. It would have safety mechanisms, but you can override them. There's ways to do it. All of this is possible right now with ChatGPT. The world is fine. That's because it's actually way harder to do all of these things that people imagine. Again, like with the $8 billion, it's not. It doesn't free you from the decision-making process. So I do think that aside from the fact that I do know that there's adults in the room that are looking from the other side and there's safety mechanism there, but even without that, they're ushering us in. They're showing us the way. And we have to figure it out ourselves. We cannot rely on them helping us because it would be equivalent to like if you hatch the egg for the chick, it won't survive. You have to let it break the egg by itself. And it's essentially the situation we're in. To me, both intuitively and both in terms of what I see, I see that is the case. We're being gently ushered towards a thing. And you nailed it when you said it's people postulate these things because they're driven by fear. And then it's very natural to say, yeah, but maybe they're doing it to walk you into a trap. It's like, listen, you can say this about
They
anything.
probably have better things to do.
You can talk about anything. Yeah, they can literally squash you like a bug. Like it's not. They don't need your presence in any particular container. So yeah,
So coming back to
Yeah, please give me an
ChatGPT,
example,
yes,
yeah.
what I thought about is exactly what you just said about decision making. I think the problem is not at least I didn't think about the problems with the outside world, but much more with the inner world, because it seems that something that gives you a sort of much larger range of possibilities. The main question is, how do you apply it? The decision making, what do you focus it on? And I think that most people, same with social media, is just gonna waste their time hours upon hours, days upon days, doing nothing, scrolling, watching things they shouldn't.
But how is that connected to ChatGPT?
Well, I mean, you can do this. Ultimately, you can do the same thing with ChatGPT.
I don't think so,
GPT,
because
just
ChatGPT
doing-
requires a very particular input from you. It requires you to ask the right questions. It actually stimulates your brain in exactly the right ways to lead you to be a better decision maker. It's not the same as, it's not like somebody prepared content for you, just scroll. This is very easy. Interacting with ChatGPT is never like this. Even in your brain, you're going to have to pause, formulate, think about what you want to ask, what's the next thing. That's why I don't see
That's a
it
good
ever
point.
landing it. That's why
That's a
I
good
see.
point.
Huh?
That's
yeah.
a good
Yeah,
point,
yeah.
yeah.
It's not the same, and it's true. If I want to steelman your side of the conversation, you can say that maybe people will just use it as a, like a thing that does everything for them. That what I mean, like I'm just gonna write all my papers or gonna do all the thing. I think if you're really gonna run through it, you would see that in every single case of that, you would still have a much larger possibility of the thing helping you formulate better things because you're going to be competing in a much larger space of others that are giving you some examples of how to do it. So if you're going to be the one that is just kind of asking everything to be copied, forget about the fact that now you have like a thing to just flags. Like it tells you that it's all ChatGPT. So you can do that. You can just put a prompt. Somebody sent you something. It will tell you what percentage of it was ChatGPT.
nice.
Yeah. So that alone kind of limits that possibility. So you're not gonna get away with anything. But also, very quickly you're going to start feeling empty. And that kind of emptiness, it requires immediate action from you.
But does it? People feel very empty these days.
No. So I'll tell you why it's different. Again, it has to do with the accessibility. So, for example, with the scrolling, you feel emptier and emptier. So what you do is you keep trying to get the fix. But you just have to move your thumb, right? There, when you feel empty, if your only way is to actually like pause and like, okay, what am I actually trying to do? The tiniest moment of that will give you the kind of meaning of reciprocation that doesn't exist in social media. It's a lot more deep, right? Because you're interacting with the true nature of yourself. You realize your limitations, which is painful, but you're forced to keep like, carving it out.
So you're saying that it would actually purify people more and make them more focused.
Absolutely. You will be forced you'll be forced to become more than what you are because you're going to become more of what you actually are, right? And then I still agree with you, by the way, that we still have to solve the social media problem. The reason I wanted to challenge you is because, first of all, there's these new statistics that came out that I'm not necessarily, I want to make it clear, I'm not making a case for or against it. I'm just planting an idea that it might be that we are a little bit too hyperbolic in terms of what, it's very easy to get on the ride of doom and gloom, right? So everything that Tristan Harris is doing, that even though I do think he's a positive agent, I don't see him doing favors anyone. Because
What is he doing? I'm not familiar.
he's one of the first kind of like alarm activators around all the stuff with social media. They made this famous movie. I forget the name of it. It was on Netflix about like all the dangers of social media and what it's doing to the youth and all the stuff. The memeplex of that, right? But what I'm seeing is that A, they're not offering solutions, and B, what are the things going to happen? It's not going anywhere. It is going in one direction. It's going to happen. It's happening, right? So all you're doing really is you're creating doubt in the minds of the people whose actual well-being depends on understanding these tools better than anyone else. The people who are going to be left behind more than anyone if they don't engage with it currently are the 40 and 50-year-olds that are like working for Walmart who can literally change their lives if they use these tools correctly. And if they just heard an expert telling them that this is all of this danger, they're not going to engage with it, and they're going to be left behind. They're truly going to be left behind. It's going to be this.
And by the way, I'm not ever for destroying anything or putting a label of it's bad. I'm just talking more on sort of the level of personal well-being for
Yeah,
people
I
and
agree.
making their own judgments.
Yeah,
Because
so
I'm definitely never an advocate for people should do that or people should do this. I think it has to be a personal search.
Recent statistics showed that actually, even though it is true that there are some cases, if you analyze the data in a particular way, you can talk about higher suicide rate at a particular age because of the comparison of the image. All of that, I'm familiar with that. But there is the case to be made that actually there's other statistics, other parameters that are way higher than ever, and they're positive ones. So, for example, understanding social cohesion and understanding the boundary element. So and I see it already like in my younger nephews, like they understand boundaries in a way that nobody when I was that age understood. Right? They know what they want. They understand. Like there's a solidified agency there in a way that it was never before. And
But I'm
yeah,
sorry,
sure.
just to play devil's advocate.
Sure.
But they know what they want as they truly know what they want, or they know what they want because they've seen it and were.
I will
taught
clarify.
that
There seems to be a better understanding of the true ethical code. So there's like they understand what's correct, what's proper. We can look at the details because I don't want to pull it out of my ass, but there's definitely parameters we can look at that seem that a lot of positive things like less early pregnancies, less crime among teenagers, less violence. Now, you can keep playing this game forever. You can say, yeah, but that's because they engage with each other less. Okay, fair enough. But we really want to look at the situation for what it really is. I do think that everything you're pointing to is true. There's definitely the problems we need to remedy, but I think they are not the problem of the tool, but the problem of the monkey behind the tool currently. So we brought all of our old,
But isn't it
ways.
always the case?
It is always the case, but there's also the potential that we're bringing about what we can become and already becoming. To some, I do see a very big emergence of a more proper, holistic way of looking at each other, talking to each other. It's really in small things, but it's really there. Like it's so much easier now to behave with one another that is like a lot more humane that ever we could think about. Like there's definitely the problems in the world, but it's much easier to like hug people. It's much easier, you know what I mean? Like
But I think it's also because the level of safety, the level of comfort is so much greater because, if we were in the forest, potentially of two conflicting tribes,
yeah.
we might not be so willingly hug each other, but
Wait,
is
so
sort of,
what are you connecting it in our situation then?
I'm connecting it to, you say it's easier for people to make those genuine connections.
In places in the world where they are influenced by all this social media is what I'm saying.
Oh, I
So,
see.
so it might be the result of that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting, because
Because you
I would
interact with more
think,
people, yeah.
interesting, because it's I kind of thought, I see what you're saying exactly, and I agree with that. And at the same time, it seems that people might be, there's like another side of this coin where people might not express their genuine emotions, but might play it out as they do on social
So
media.
sometimes fake it till you make it is okay. Again, I just want to make it clear. I do agree with you that there's definitely things we have to look at seriously and try and resolve them. I agree with you. It's just that usually, well, you run a business, right? So you know that under fire, it's a lot harder to make coherent decisions. It's much better if you can bring yourself to a more balanced state, right? So the more we scream fire, the harder it is to make real
100%.
decisions. Yeah, that's all I'm
100%.
saying. So then I do think that ultimately, well, I guess I'm also, I'm pretty optimistic in general about the future, and it does not mean that I do not understand the potential dangers. It's just that it's kind of like in a car accident, the way that I see it. Where your eyes are going to go, that's where the car is going to go, right? And that's like a known thing. So if you're going to keep looking at all the terrible things it can be, you might end up there. And it's better for me to aim towards a better world than to aim towards a potential of a terrible world. I always say again, I'm not hearing you doing it at all, but I do want to voice this because it's an important understanding. The people who derive a lot of meaning from talking about all the terrible things that can go wrong, my question to them is always, how good do you really think it's going to feel if the mushroom cloud goes off and you just happen to be next to somebody who you used to tell this to and go, see? Like, it's like, okay,
Right.
it's like, great, but you had a terrible time the whole time and they enjoyed themselves and okay, but it's already happening. So just put sunglasses and relax. Like, it is what it is, right? So even in the worst possible scenario, we're still better off of postulating the best world, because that's essentially, like you said, it is always the case that eventually it's the expression of what the most powerful thing in that region of space is, which is us. And if you want to connect it to some kind of a universal, beautiful picture, which I think tracks perfectly, everything that was ever in the human mind is now out. Like, well, not everything, but a lot. But let's say it the other way. Everything that we have here was in somebody's mind. Okay, so that tells you that whatever you believe about the world, mental events can and do translate to physical events. Currently, we're just this tiny thing that doesn't really know how to do much aside from being like around its own planet. But if you run the clock forward and we don't destroy ourselves, which there's no guarantees, by the way, but if we don't, everything in our mind will paint the galaxy and eventually the universe. So at that point, knowledge becomes the dominant force in the universe more than any other force, because it can mimic all the other forces, right? And the things that in the universe that are executing the power of knowledge, like ourselves, have a paramount responsibility to be the kind of thing that will execute the right kind of knowledge, right? So literally, the way that I look at you, the way that I greet you in the morning, eventually, in the aggregate, translates directly to the fate of the universe. So it's, to me, that's very clear, right?
Well,
So,
as they say, the universe is before I had a sip of this coffee, and then it's never the same if I did or if I didn't.
yeah.
It's a different universe from this point on, and et cetera, et cetera. I think I absolutely 1,000,000% agree with you, and I think my point really is about personal agency, about being responsible of what you're doing to yourself, not because you owe it to anybody else, but simply because you kind of owe it to yourself, because otherwise you're destroying yourself. And what's the point of that? So when I was talking about kind of quote unquote the ills of social media, I don't mean it in the universal terms, because as everything, there are shades of gray, in absolutely everything, but it's just much more about, because it seems to me that the world, and I think maybe that's why sometimes people have such a reaction to what you're talking about, is because there's so much stuff that people just can't take any more stuff, and they're completely frantic.
Yeah.
Because they're receiving so much information that is just too much. So my point really was just kind of center yourself
Yes.
in yourself,
We're in full agreement. Yeah.
and then proceed, and then no social media is gonna harm you, no chat GPT is gonna harm you, because you're gonna know what do you actually want and where you're actually going.
Or better, yeah. And I would say the only thing I guess I was really trying to get across is that the problem might not be as dire as you think it is, and believing that it is might be the bigger problem.
That I agree completely.
Yeah, because for the most part, I think that this is my personal belief. I didn't run all the meta-analyses, but I have strongly, my intuition tells me this strongly, that all the stuff that you see on social media that is terrible, it is actually a tiny minority of most of the people, and they're just very loud. And then the rest, because I see beautiful things that people make. And by the way, you can test it for yourself. If you want to override the algorithm, and like you said, the agency, right? If you want to take back your agency, even on Instagram, which at the moment currently for me is the worst of all offenders. No, because it pushes things that are just like not. It's kind of crazy. Like if you're a guy, it automatically puts these like semi-porn things for you, and it's like you don't have to click on them. It will always be there as suggested because they know you're a guy. That's it. But it is elastic. So if you want to take agency, search in your search a few times, cute puppies as a guy.
That's a
cool,
nice hack.
cool cars, whatever. You do it 5 or 6 times, it will change. Okay? But you have to take that agency. Otherwise, it's like, oh, you're a guy. Boobs. It's just how it is, right? And for women, it's usually shopping or whatever. But it's just, the algorithm knows that's what works.
That's what I kind of mean, because in a lot of things we want what we see, and we don't know we want it before we saw. So if we're shown a certain information, and I'm not taking it to more extremes like porn or whatever, but anything you see watches too much, all of a sudden you start thinking maybe I should get a watch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like anything. So in a way, I think that's what I'm also talking about. Just stepping back and just kind of feeling it out for yourself. What do I actually want?
So I wanted to clarify, because I actually was making a deeper point, but maybe it wasn't very obvious. What I mean by that is that there's certain things that when it grab our attention, they actually they lead us into these infinite loops. That's actually about well-being. So there's nothing wrong with beautiful naked women. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that at the moment, that's not what I was here for, right?
That's what I'm saying.
So the agency, you can just
it gives you the choices or the wants that you might not want right now, but it takes you the thing with the human mind and human attention is that it's very quickly switches from one thing to another,
and it's triggering you immediately. Yeah.
You always pretty much fall into a trap of and then you never on the point of like, why did I even get here? What was my purpose here? Like, what was I doing with this?
Yeah.
Whatever it is. And I think that's what the point I was trying to get across. Like, helping yourself to sort of center and realize what do I actually want? What am I doing? And then give me all the choices. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Throw anything at me. I'm not going to lose my center because I'm just going to pick whatever is applicable and leave whatever it's not.
And I think where I can meet you exactly where we would have, I think, full agreement is that I do believe that the tech giants do have a responsibility to do the research, to understand what actually helps the human mind to be more centered and natural, and not hide behind the thing, well, the algorithm thinks that. Sure, but you can also kind of help humans through the algorithm to maybe have better suggestions for what is actually better for them. You might create better societies this way. So I'm in full agreement that there's responsibility across the board. But the only thing you can truly influence at the moment, unless you're going to go and lobby or try and have these conversations with Zuckerberg or whatever, you still have the agency. You do. You can turn it off. Like it's a real thing you can do. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm definitely not a proponent of fighting, like ghosts. You can turn it off. I deleted Instagram from my personal phone and just kept it on company phone.
Beautiful.
Because that just eliminated, I'm sure, 2 hours of
your day
of useless.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And only you can make that choice. Like nobody is gonna Zuckerberg is not gonna come and delete it for me. So that's absolutely. But Denny, everything that we've spoken about, one question that that I'm very interested in asking you. From everything that you've described, in your personal opinion and kind of more universally, what's the purpose then of this life?
So of you existing in it, or of the simulation? I
Human existence
Yeah, I would
in
be
this
I would be I
world.
would be a fool to pretend like I know that. But I do know that it seems that it has to do with actually something we've heard a million times before, which is that knowing how to be more equanimous in the present moment, but truly. And that's because, again, if you're in 5 dimensions, 7 dimensions, 3 dimensions, uh, that skill never the need for that skill never goes away. If you reach universal basic income and there's infinite resources for everything and everything is just free and you do, what's the only value that remains? Well, your vibe. Like how you feel, how it feels to be in your presence, which is a derivative of your vibe. If you leave the room and people are relieved, well, you have negative value, right? Or the other thing, which is like if you leave the room and people just want you to come back immediately, they would always want you around. That is the only true value, but it is a direct result of your inner state. Balancing the inner state, I would say, learning how to balance the inner state is the ultimate goal of all these games, because ultimately it seems to also be leading to the ultimate understanding. How it's actually trying to achieve it, I'm just reporting honestly from what I saw, with the full disclosure that, of course, it can be the case that everything I'm being shown is incorrect. Sure, but you have to start somewhere. You kind of have to sit somewhere to make a decision, right? And it seems, so far, it seems correct, and it seems like we're entering this stage of higher understanding that is supposed to usher us into some kind of a new age. And just a final point on that, because people always say, what is why would it be this like game-like scenario? Well, the thing that does make sense to me, I was just talking about this with somebody right before I came here, actually, which is that we're now seeing that certain monkeys entering their stone age. I don't know if you've heard of this, but we have observed them using tools like spears to fish, things like this. So they're literally entering their stone age. But notice that we're sharing a physical space with them. So currently they're still pretty limited, but there will come a time, if we're still on the same planet, where they're advanced enough to kind of have more advanced thought but not quite like ours. And obviously we're also going to advance more. So seeing us in their environment might be a little bit too disruptive to their development, because it's just too much. It's just like they already understand things, but they're like spaceships, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So then the ethical thing would be, if we can, to make ourselves as less noticeable to them as possible until they evolve to a certain level, which I think is exactly how it works. Because in the infinite informational space between dimensions, you have all these evolutions, bubbles of evolutions, and sometimes there's Venn diagrams where they coexist. And when that happens, the beings that can make themselves as invisible as possible until the moment comes when it's no longer possible to hide yourself, because then you're going to be, it's not allowed to intervene with anybody's evolution, which means that if you're going to try and stop somebody's evolution, you're not supposed to do that. So we evolved to a certain level where we understand certain things about quantum physics, about our environment. Okay, we can no longer be held back from certain truths. So now there's protocols in place of how to help us enter into this higher understanding without jolting us too much. And that's essentially what I think is happening, and why all of these new emergent phenomena that you're seeing are happening.
And on personal, personal to each individual, because it seems like there are obviously some sort of talents or presupposition, what's the word? Like things that you are either interested or good at.
Mhm.
What
Predispensations. Yeah.
yeah,
I also forgot that word for
I
a
know,
second.
right? What role does that play into purpose?
Yeah, I mean, some people are more better soccer players. Some people are better channelers. It's that simple.
But
Some people are just, they're dialed into a particular function that is,
But does it mean that they have to pursue that?
yeah, of course. If you want to develop the skill, the fact that you can bounce the ball really well, it's not going to make you a world-class player. You have to train like everything else. You have to hone in the informational pattern to understand to be creative in it. That's the only way to advance. Of course, yeah. But they're essentially just the predispensations. They're essentially just kind of like initial cards, but you still have to play the game.
But do you because sometimes people throw the cards and say no, that I should
Okay.
It doesn't matter. That's what you're saying.
Oh, you mean in the ultimate scheme of things?
In the ultimate scheme of things,
Makes
do
no
you
difference
have
whatsoever.
a personal sort of like a thing? One has to be a doctor, the other one has to,
Yeah.
you know.
Both me and Kelsey had this experience before, and we kind of laughed when we realized both have we had this experience, and I've heard other people have it in different ways. But essentially, the experience is basically of we're so happy that you're here, and you don't matter at all. If you wouldn't be here, it'd be absolutely fine.
Damn.
Yeah, but
Crashing the ego.
it's a very sobering realization. It's like,
Very.
hey, things are not that serious. Your opinions and all of that stuff, it doesn't matter that much. But it's a beautiful thing. I think it actually removes again, there is this first
Removes the
part.
pressure, right?
But,
A little.
yeah, but also there is this first part, which is it's so great you're here. And they mean that. They're so happy you're here. But it doesn't matter.
Do aliens exist?
Absolutely, yeah, of course. But they're just there's all the different layers, and there's the simulators of our reality, and then there's the simulators of that reality, and the simulator all the way to what you would call the source. And that thing is, obviously beyond comprehension, which also I am kind of on this hobby horse of mentioning this because it's a little bit fun to point that out. But I think that when we say higher self, all of these things that we currently use, what we're pointing to in our mind's eye is not that. It's our local thing. It's our local little bubble. But there's others. There's others that are also unified selves. And beyond that, there's the unified of the unified selves. And it really goes on for quite a while. So what the source really is, it's not the kind of thing that you can ever point to in your mind's eye. You can't. It's beyond where your mind can find a vector towards it.
Mm-hmm.
You can maybe sense it, but it's not anything you can begin to comprehend. And I think the only real value of this kind of statement and thinking is that it's something that Alan Watts once said that I really agree with, which is the act of actual faith is one of absolute trust. And what that means is that you build no images of God. You just live your life.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I know that you've mentioned that some people in the government saw the code.
Correct.
What's the significance of that?
I mean, I think in practical terms is that people that are very no bullshit kind of attitude, and they obviously saw it. They're not easily fooled, or at least all humans can be fooled, but they didn't come into this, just wanting things to be true. Not just people that can exert a certain level of power, but also people, wealthy and powerful people have seen the code. And it is interesting that they very rarely, I personally never, I'm saying rarely because I'm sure it exists, but I never met one person over a certain level of caliber that has the attributes that most people attribute to people with power and money.
How do you mean?
They're wonderful people. So I don't see this, I think the demonization of powerful and wealthy people is one of the biggest traps that we suffer currently from, because it's coming from a very negative, probably jealous. You saw it now here with the fires in LA, where a lot of wealthy people lost their homes, and there was this almost like good. That's going to be our end right there. Yeah, that should not exist. We should extend the love that we can to all humans. Usually, people with a certain amount of influence did something. They got them there, and it's not cheating other people of things. It's very rarely that you can actually get just by cheating, right? You have to produce something that's of value to society. I'm saying all this is because the value of people, we're just using people in the government as like a placeholder for people with influence, is that they don't quite know what to do with it, obviously. So I do see that it's upon me and my team to come up with things that others can partake in, which we're doing. We started an organization called Code of Reality, and we have now people walking in with high technical skills to help us build the thing. And we call it cognitive physics because we can't think of anything better that kind of fits the bill. But it is the attempt to actually create a full intersection between what consciousness and reality really is and how they operate together. In what way are they the same thing, and how we can test for that. And as part of that project, we have incredible people that are walking into the space that are both technically capable. They have power and influence in the world, and so all we can do is just allow it to unfold and put our best foot forward and try to do our best, and the rest of it kind of takes care of itself. The significance of it, I think, is that it is truly the next step. We're truly there. Like it's people think singularity in 20, 30 years. We're in it. It's happening now. Within a year, this world will be unrecognizable. So,
Thank you, Danny.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure.